Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, April the 23rd, 2024. We've got a full moon coming up. Full moon is this evening or tomorrow, depending on your time zone, and I think we're really starting to feel its impact. And so I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about full moons in general. What are full moons about, with particular reference to the natal chart? And so I thought I would take this opportunity to look at a few people who've got full moons in their horoscopes, and a number of characters from American politics who've got full moons in their charts. Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, AOC, plus we've got some royals who got full moons in their charts. Of course, Princess Catherine and her son, Prince George, and I don't know, Alec Baldwin. He's an actor, isn't he? Yeah, apparently he's got a full moon in his chart. So I'm going to look at some charts which have full moons in them. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, April the 23rd, 2024. And the chart here is the chart for noon today, Tuesday, April the 23rd, 2024. And you can see that the moon is at 0 degrees 20 minutes Scorpio, New York time. Now, if you are in London, the moon will go into Scorpio at 4:20 p.m. this afternoon. If you are in New York, it will go into Scorpio at 11:20 this morning. And if you're in California, the Pacific coast, then it goes into Scorpio at 7:20 a.m. So there is a question: is it a moon in Scorpio day or a moon in Libra day? If you're in the Americas, I would have said it's pretty much a moon in Scorpio day. If you're in Western Europe, then, or Europe in general, Western Africa, then the moon goes into Scorpio later in the day. If you're in India, it's going to go into Scorpio in the evening, late-ish in the evening. If you're in Australia or New Zealand or Japan, the Philippines, then the moon is really not going to go into Scorpio until tomorrow. So it does somewhat depend on your time zone, but we can still think in terms of a sign change from a moon moving from Libra to Scorpio. And this sign change is quite powerful. Libra and Scorpio are very different signs. I mean, Libra is an air sign working at a fairly mental, cognitive level, whereas Scorpio, it's in a water sign. Focus on the emotions, deep emotions, sometimes fixed emotions. And this moon in Scorpio is opposition the sun. The moment it moves into Scorpio, it starts making an opposition to the sun in Taurus. And of course, by definition, when you've got the moon opposition the sun, it's a full moon. And the full moon is exact New York time at 7:49 in the afternoon. Sorry, 7:49 in the evening. 10 to 8 in the evening, the full moon is exact, which will be 10 to 5 in the afternoon if you're in California or Oregon or British Columbia. If you are in Western Europe, the full moon it doesn't take place until tomorrow. So you could say that the full moon is tomorrow's phenomenon. And and if you're certainly in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, it's much later. So you could say that the full moon is really happening tomorrow. So, and it does depend on your time zone, but I really want to talk about the full moon for full moon today, as if one is in America, but still we're feeling it. It is, whether or not the moon is in Libra or Scorpio for you today, the full moon is upon us, and we really do need to think about it. And so with this full moon, there's always a feeling of polarity to two planets, the sun and the moon. Of course, the sun and the moon are the lights. Technically, astronomically, they're not, of course, planets. The moon is a satellite, the sun is a star. But when they're opposition each other, we are aware of a difference, a clash. And we have, for example, the clash between moon in Scorpio, sun in Taurus. Moon in Scorpio is about the emotions being quite intense, perhaps keeping things to ourselves. Sun in Taurus, by contrast, is about being down to earth. We don't want to get caught up in these emotional games. We just want to bring it down to earth. And there is perhaps that struggle to bring our feelings earthwards, to make them real and to apply them to something concrete, and not just to keep them to ourselves. And that can be about how the clash is working out. Additionally, moon in Scorpio, sun in Taurus, fixed signs. That's always going to be the case when you've got a full moon. If it's an exact full moon, certainly they are going to have the same quality. It could be a mutable full moon, a fixed new moon, a fixed full moon, or a cardinal full moon. This full moon is in fixed signs. Therefore, can be a bit rigid. If you've got a mutable full moon, for example, Gemini to Sagittarius, it might be about something bending. With a fixed full moon, it can be more about something breaking. Something has to give. You're not going to have some easy transition from one state into another. So that full moon, regardless of your time zone, I think is going to have an increasingly strong influence. And the moon, when it goes into Scorpio, makes a square to Pluto, and that's a reminder that the full moon is square Pluto. And it's a time that things are really super intense, that things can be really held on to. People don't want to let go. And as a result, we can have issues about power. That can be a feature of this particular full moon, because it is tied up with Pluto. As far as the midpoints are concerned, a couple of midpoints possibly worth noting. Mercury. There's Mercury. Mercury is, you can see that Mercury is approximately 17 or 18 degrees from the Sun, and it's approximately 18 degrees from Neptune. So Mercury is on the Sun-Neptune midpoint, conjunct the Sun-Neptune midpoint. So Mercury is how we think, how we express ourselves. And if it's on the Sun-Neptune midpoint, we might get a little confused. I mean, the Sun-Neptune conjunction is perhaps about the principle of ourself, but us being quite nebulous about ourself and who we are and what we want to achieve. We're not absolutely sure. There is some uncertainty there. And so with Mercury on the Sun-Neptune, conjunct the Sun-Neptune midpoint, that might reflect our uncertainty. So when we say things, we might say things in a way that doesn't actually sound very committed because maybe we're not particularly sure. And so if we are uncertain about something, perhaps we should keep quiet about it today. Because if we try to explain, then our uncertainty will could become public knowledge, and that is not what we want. We just won't be clear. And so I know that Mercury is in Aries. We want to say something, but Mercury is about to go direct. Let's just perhaps wait a bit before potentially making a fool of ourselves. But in a few days' time, I think we're going to be a little bit clearer. And another aspect that we have is there's another midpoint, potentially quite a useful midpoint, and there is. Remember, we've got a Jupiter. Remember, we've got a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. That Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is still very much there. It may not be exact anymore, but Jupiter-Uranus conjunctions are about the principle of freedom, expressing our freedom, wanting to liberate ourselves from something. There's the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. There's Mars making a sextile to that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And there's Venus on the midpoint. So Venus is on the Mars-Jupiter and the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And Venus on that midpoint may be about expressing our freedom through who we hang out and who we don't hang out with. Certain people may be holding us back. Other people may be giving us a vision of freedom. They're the kind of people we want to interact with. And so a good measure of our freedom is, who are we mixing with? Are we mixing with people in a voluntary sense? Or do we feel that everyone around us is just holding us back? And I think we have to be honest about that and perhaps recognize that some people are just too restrictive, at least for the moment. And perhaps we should distance ourselves from them. So that's the broad geocentric position. I want to, as usual, look at the positions of the planets from a heliocentric perspective. So let's put the Sun in the center of the solar system, where arguably it should be. And we can see that the T-square involving Mercury opposition the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction and square Mars is now starting to break up. I've talked about it for quite a few days now, but this T-square with Mars on the T of that Mercury opposition Jupiter, Mercury opposition Uranus, I think being quite a strong influence. I think potentially it could have been quite a violent influence. But that T, yes, it's breaking up, and I don't think it's the influence that it was. I don't think it's the influence it was not so long ago. And still, Mercury is square Jupiter. We shouldn't forget that. So, Mercury is square Mars. We shouldn't forget that. So there's still potential for saying things in quite an impulsive way with that heliocentric square, but we shouldn't forget that Mercury is conjunct with Sun, Neptune, midpoint. Yes, we might be in a hurry to say things, but is it really such a good idea? Another aspect perhaps that should point out heliocentric Venus semi-square Uranus, it's starting to form. Perhaps particularly late in the day, Venus semi-square Uranus may stir things up as far as relationships are concerned. Venus is a relationship planet. Uranus is about drama. And maybe that supports what I was saying about Venus on the Mars-Jupiter and Venus on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. It's more evidence that we really need to be free of any relationship that is in any way restricting our freedom of action. All things being equal, as usual, you have to consider the situation. So not a great deal to report on the heliocentric front, and not much new going on in that department, at least as far as I can see. I'm sure there is stuff going on, but I've just been a bit too skimpy on it, and I haven't really focused on it as hard as I should have done. And going back to the geocentric universe, the geocentric solar system, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching. Let's start again. I want to consider the astrology for the 12 signs of the zodiac. And let me just switch this chart to the 0 degrees Aries on the. There we are. Okay, so these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, April the 23rd, 2024. Aries, be a little patient today. Particularly Aries, be patient with other people. I know, Aries, that you're in a hurry, that you'd like to get things done. But I don't think things are going to move as fast as you would like. And I think you have to consider the possibility that some people are just delaying. Who knows why they're delaying? They're just holding on, and it almost feels like they don't want to move on. They're perhaps afraid of moving on. They're happy where they are. If they perhaps take the view that if they were to move on, something bad might happen. And this could be very disruptive of your social life, all your various networks. Just things just could be just slow, and you could get really annoyed. You might even be tempted to lose your temper. But I think you do have to be patient. Let things work their way through in their own way. And it is probably a good idea, Aries, if you pay some attention to your own thoughts and feelings, especially late in the day, because the moon is starting to move into Scorpio, and with the moon moving into Scorpio, the emphasis is starting to move onto the emotional side of things, and you're perhaps realizing how complicated things actually are. As an Aries, you don't really like things to be complicated. You want just everything to be simple and direct. But today, I don't think that things are simple and direct. You need to take time to understand. And I've just said at the beginning of this piece on Aries that you might find that people are dragging their feet. They don't want to interact. They're in their own space. And before getting annoyed, you should try to understand what is holding people back. It may not be immediately apparent. At least it may not be immediately apparent to you. And I think it would be a good idea if you took the time to really try to understand what was going on. Listen to people's feelings. Look at their body language. Consider how someone has behaved towards you in the past. Maybe you can see a pattern here, and you're seeing that pattern develop. And really, that is the broad picture for today. Though, don't give up on everyone, because primarily when I'm talking about you getting annoyed with people, I'm particularly talking about people in general. When it comes to individuals, because the group and the individual, they are two separate things. When it comes to particular individuals, that might be a slightly different picture. And there are going to be some people in your life who actually have quite a lot of energy. Again, I'm really talking about a one-to-one thing. They've got a lot of energy and they need a lot of space. And you really need to respect that. And that's another reason why you have to be tolerant, because people really do, they do want to express themselves, and you need to allow them to express themselves. And it's very important, Aries, that you're not judgmental. Taurus, we have a full moon brewing. This full moon is across the main axis of your chart. The moon is in Scorpio and the sun is in Taurus. So when you've got a moon Scorpio when you've got a sun moon opposition on the main axis, in the main axis of your chart, it may feel that something is coming to light. That in terms of your relationships, you're starting to see people for what they really are, and it may feel that you're coming to a bit of a watershed. That things have reached a point where something really has to happen. And I think that's a good thing. And it's just important that you don't hold on too much. If something has to change, then you do have to accept that. And I know that sounds a bit sort of grim, but it's not the only thing going on. We can get obsessed about full moons. And, this full moon, depending on your time zone, may be more of a feature of tomorrow. So it's something perhaps you need to prepare for. If you're in the Americas, I think that the full moon is more about today. So it kind of does depend on where you are. But aside from a full moon, Venus is your ruler, and Venus is conjunct the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. It is conjunct the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And, let's just think about what that means. Recently, we've had Mars making a sextile to Jupiter and Uranus. Now, Venus is halfway between Mars and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And that really does colour how Venus is going to express itself. And therefore, that has an impact on Taurus. And I think that Taurians today are really going to have an idea about how they want to lead their life. And if anything has been holding you back, has been restricting your freedom, you will see it. It'll be clear. And you are going to want to take immediate action to be able to, escape from it. And so it would be a good idea if you accepted this situation. Don't just keep going in a place which is fundamentally unacceptable to you, because you will be making your own life miserable. I think you'll be making your other people's life miserable. I understand that Taurus is a fixed sign, and Taurus can sometimes be suspicious of change. But today, if you feel you need to free yourself from something, get away from something, don't hang on, because if you were to hang on for too long, you're just going to get frustrated. And let's look at it from a positive perspective. You can create new possibilities for yourself, and the faster you do it, the more promptly you do it, the more natural will be the changeover. Though I suppose I do have to give one warning here. Venus is conjunct the Mars-Uranus midpoint. And the Mars-Uranus combination can actually be a little bit accident-prone. So while I would encourage you to demand your freedom and not to get stuck in one place, on a physical level, don't rush it, especially if you're doing things that are dangerous, whether they're dangerous in terms of, for example, your social life, or you're driving, doing stuff with machinery, playing with knives, worse still, playing with guns. Don't do anything dangerous. And if you have to do something dangerous or potentially dangerous, be very careful and really understand what the safety protocols are. So just a small warning there. I think for most Taurians, it's not going to have an impact, but I suppose it's better safe than sorry, isn't it? Gemini. It's a time when Geminis are in some process of change. I think, Gemini, you're starting to realize that things are maybe a little more serious than you would have liked, and that it's nice to enjoy yourself and to have fun, but there are limits, and at a certain stage you have to consider plain reality, and there are things that need to be sorted out. They might be quite physical things, but it might also be about your feelings. Maybe recently, your feelings have been in a process of transition. It hasn't been helped perhaps by the fact that Mercury has been going retrograde, and Mercury is about to go direct in a couple of days' time. And so you do feel you are in a position of transition. And before Mercury goes direct, it might be best to just stop what you're doing and work out how you feel about the world and what you need to do about your feelings. I think one problem with Gemini is that Geminis can be unaware of their feelings, and their feelings can trip them up. They can occur in ways they don't expect. It's like I remember long ago, I'm a Gemini, remember. Someone knocked on my door, and they were a Christian, and they were handing out pamphlets to go to their church, and this young woman, I was pretty young myself then, she gave me this leaflet, and I took this leaflet and I started talking to her, and I was being incredibly polite, and I said yes, I might go, and I was being really nice. And then this woman turned to me and she said, but how come you are screwing up the leaflet I gave her? So I was being polite to her, really polite, and all the while I was taking this leaflet she'd handed me and I was crunching it into this tiny ball. And that shows that Geminis need to be aware of their feelings, because your brain can be going in one way and your actions can be going in another way. And so Gemini, do consider that. Do consider your feelings, because if you don't consider your feelings, they're going to crop up in ways you weren't expecting. Like me crunching up that leaflet into a tiny ball. I wasn't really annoyed. I didn't think I was annoyed, but apparently I was annoyed. We should never underestimate psychological determinism. Another thing, Gemini, is that Mercury is conjunct your Sun, the Sun-Neptune midpoint. And I think Geminis have to be very careful about how they communicate. And perhaps about making decisions, because Mercury on the Sun, Neptune midpoint can be about confusion. It can be about not really knowing all the facts, and at the same time coming over in a way that is weak. So if we're not sure of our facts, if we're not 100% committed, and we try to express ourselves, we don't come over very powerfully. I know Geminis like to come over powerfully. Here's me with this video. I'm trying my best to come over powerfully, but you might perhaps notice, Mercury conjunct the Sun, Neptune can weaken one's impact. So yes, I've committed to doing these YouTube videos every day, but pretty much. But if you don't have to communicate, then maybe you shouldn't, because perhaps you're just not going to be able to come over in a sufficiently effective way. One other point, Gemini, about relationships, and today there is a semi-sextile between Mercury and Jupiter. Mercury is your ruler. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, your opposite sign. So if you've got Mercury-Jupiter semi-sextile, then it might be a situation where you and another person, particularly someone close to you, partner, spouse, someone like that, may have different priorities and may be on a different wavelength. You've got choices how to deal with it. I'm not saying that you should necessarily stay away from each other. This is not a Mercury-Jupiter square or an opposition. It's a semi-sextile. I think you have to just accept that another person has a different way of expressing themselves. Perhaps that's, we've got Venus, Mercury in Aries. That's you, perhaps wanting to be bold and assertive. I'm not actually suggesting you should be bold and assertive, by the way, but that's the way you may feel. Against Jupiter, which is Jupiter is in Taurus, the other person may want things done in a particular way. They may be quite staid, and your self-expression and their self-expression just may not work together, and somehow you need to perhaps compromise, and somehow you and the other person need to work through that. Cancer. It's perhaps a slightly difficult time for Cancerians for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the moon is changing sign. Moon is moving from Libra to Scorpio. That changeover period can often be difficult because the moon is your ruler. And one of the things about being a Cancer is that your ruler is very fast moving. The other signs have much slower rulers, but the Cancer's ruler is much faster. So you kind of get these changeovers more frequently, every few days. So perhaps you're quite used to these changeovers. But when you've got a changeover and you've got a full moon involved, because the moment the moon moves into Scorpio, it makes the opposition to the sun. In fact, arguably, it's already making the opposite. In late Libra, you're starting to feel it. So because of this changeover, you may just feel that you're not ready to commit to anything. And I think that is fine. There may be pressure to commit, but really, Cancer, you just don't have all the facts. And if you don't have all the facts, then I think it's best to just accept the situation and postpone decisions for later. And with this full moon in Scorpio, Sun in Taurus, it might be a good time to reevaluate where you stand within your social world. And you perhaps need to ask yourself, to what extent are you being respected? I mean, respect is very important to all of us, but for you it's particularly important right now. And you have to ask yourself whether perhaps your friends, associates, whatever, are really respecting you and are respecting your creativity and the things you want to do. And if they're not respecting you, then maybe it's just time to say goodbye. That's something that Cancerians are actually quite good at. When Cancerians have given up on someone, perhaps it's because they've shown a disrespect, usually that's it. I mean, Cancer is arguably one of the most unforgiving of the 12 signs. I'm not saying that being unforgiving is a bad thing. People don't change, by and large. I know we have sort of psychotherapy and all this kind of thing, but people don't change fundamentally. And if you recognise that someone is a particular kind of person, that's not going to change, and you make your decisions accordingly. And perhaps with this full moon, you start to realise who your real friends are. But your real friends are the ones that don't try to push you into doing things you don't want. Your real friends are not judgmental. They accept, how wonderful and special you are. And if they don't accept that, well, yeah, then it might be just time to, as I said, time to say goodbye. So that full moon can't be avoided. But one of the things about this changeover from Libra to Scorpio, it does invite you to be actually a little bit more of an extrovert. I think over the last couple of days, some Cancerians have felt that they just wanted to just stay in one place. Maybe it was a prolonged weekend thing, and you didn't really want to take risks, and you didn't want to be seen and heard. I did suggest to you that was not the right approach, but still, that might have been how you ended up behaving and responding. But with the moon moving into Scorpio, at least from a Cancerian perspective, moon moving into Scorpio means that you actually have, in some ways, a little more freedom, and you're allowing yourself to do more things. And perhaps that's because you're better able to tune into your feelings. I mean, Scorpio is a water sign, Cancer is a water sign, so moon has issues in Scorpio. Moon doesn't, is supposed to be fallen in Scorpio, but still, with the moon in Scorpio, I think you have a greater scope for doing the things that really you want to do. Leo. As you know, Leo, we do have this build-up to a full moon. And I am not saying that necessarily this full moon needs to be much of a problem. I understand that full moons can be problematic, simply because the sun is opposition the moon. The sun is your ruler and it's opposition the moon. So that can be, for example, you might feel that the way you want to be, the way you want to express yourself, is at odds with the way you actually feel. And yeah, that can be troubling. But this full moon is on the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint. In fact, because it's on the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint, there is strangely something rather optimistic about it. You actually see the truth about things, and the full moon may be exact tomorrow, but it depends where you are. But as the full moon gathers strength, you see the truth. And of course, seeing the truth can always be a problem. Very often we don't like to see the truth. But part of the truth is about seeing the opportunities that maybe in the past you have been denying yourself. And your brain may realize that things aren't that bad, that there are real possibilities that are starting to open for you. And I'm not saying you have immediate access to these opportunities. You may have things you need to work through, and you may have your own emotional reservations that you have to work through. But what you can do with this full moon is you can ground yourself in order to make progress out there. I suppose, it's like an oil rig, isn't it? I mean, an oil rig is supposed to produce stuff, dig for oil, but that oil rig has to be really grounded onto the seabed, I assume. I don't really know how oil rigs work, but it has to be, do they? I don't know how they work, actually, but an oil rig has to be pretty grounded. Otherwise, it will just float away or capsize or something. So if you want to do useful activity, you have to make sure the grounding is secure before moving on to how you actually deal with the world out there. And I think that is the positive side of this full moon, that you can really secure yourself. And once you've secured yourself, you get access to all the good things that you just know are available, and you certainly know it's available with the Sun conjunct the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint. And from a perspective of where you want to go in life, perhaps in your career and business and so forth, this full moon, handled correctly, can really propel you forward and actually allow you to tune into all the positive energy of Jupiter. And remember, Jupiter is in Taurus, and from a Leo perspective, Taurus is a high profile is a high profile sign. And so Jupiter and Taurus, there are plenty of things there for you. And I think that full moon is really allowing you to gain access to them. Virgo. I was talking to Gemini not so long ago, and I was saying to Gemini that you have to be a little careful how you express yourself, because there's a danger that you might not come over in the right way, and you might perhaps weaken your impact. And I do think that is a danger for you, Virgo, as well. And that is because Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury is conjunct the Sun-Neptune midpoint. So let me be more specific. I think that this is a time, Virgo, when you are starting to understand who you are, especially on an emotional level, and you're getting access to some really powerful high-level feelings, or should I say low-level feelings, because they're coming from a very deep place. And in a broader, long-term sense, this is actually empowering yourself. You are empowering yourself. But at the moment, it may still be work in progress, certainly until Mercury goes direct in a few days' time. So it's work in progress. So if work is in progress, it might not be a good idea to discuss with people what kind of work is involved. It's like you've got half-formed ideas, even half-formed feelings. You've kind of got it, but you haven't quite got it. And if you were to discuss it now, or to try to assert yourself now, particularly on a verbal level, you might be very sure of yourself, but when the moment the words come out, you're thinking, hold on, do I really know what I'm talking about? And then you might be making yourself vulnerable to criticism. And so my advice to you, Virgo, is similar to what I said to Gemini. I would have said hold back, unless you're really, really sure of yourself, because I don't think there's anything really that actually has to be said. And I think this is made perhaps more complex by the fact we've got this build up to a full moon. And the moon, yes, the moon is moving into Scorpio. And from a Virgo perspective, moon moving into Scorpio is often associated with communication. And so there is a feeling that it's time to communicate. But I would have said not yet. It's perhaps more about working out what you're going to say rather than actually saying anything, because you still don't know, and your uncertainty is plain to see. And it may be that your uncertainty could be filtering into one-to-one relationships. If you are having to engage with someone one-to-one, you're going to give the impression of being indecisive. And I don't think you're going to be able to give everything to another person. You're going to be holding a lot of stuff back. You know, even if you've been with someone for decades, there's a tendency here to hold things back. And if you're not prepared to give someone everything, perhaps you should give them nothing for the moment. Again, work in progress. So do consider that when you're getting close to anyone, or considering getting close to anyone, or spending time with someone. You're not really in the mood, or you're not really able to fully engage with someone, especially on an emotional level. But things are changing. Mercury's going to go direct. This is a temporary situation, and as always, what I'm saying is just a general picture. It's all things being equal. It's down to you to consider the circumstances and to consider what is appropriate. Libra, on the surface, it may feel that, it's not a particularly wonderful day. But on the surface, that is. You can feel the full moon, moon starting to move out of your sign, making an opposition to the sun. It feels that maybe the world is becoming more complicated, and if the world is becoming more complicated, well, what can you do? And it's difficult to know what to do. But pause for a moment and consider the potential for freedom, liberation, and excitement. After all, Mars is just separating from a conjunction with Jupiter and Uranus. It's still there. I mean, it's not as strong as it was a few days ago, but Mars is still sextile Jupiter, sextile Uranus. A lot of energy there. Mars, as a planet, rules Aries, which is your opposite sign. So that says something about other people. There are exciting people around. These exciting people might like to do things their own way. They might be very particular, but still they have got a sense of excitement that things can happen, and they are potentially there for you. And Venus is the ruler of Venus is your ruler. It's the ruler of Libra. And Venus at the moment is on the Mars-Jupiter and the Mars-Uranus midpoint. So it's picking up on the Mars-Jupiter sextile, the Mars-Uranus sextile. And so as Venus is your ruler, you really pick up on it all. And however troublesome things might seem on the surface, I think many Librans are just going to just get this fundamental sense of optimism that actually things are getting better and that there's a lot to be excited about. And this excitement can come from you, but it can also come from other people, the right people. And that's what I meant by with that Mars sextile Jupiter. So don't get fooled by surface appearances, all this gloomy talk about the Scorpio full moon and why the Scorpio full moon is a problem. It needn't be a problem. And the full moon, okay, it shows you stuff, shows you the way things are. You might get insights into how you should and shouldn't be, for example, running your finances. That's a possibility. May give you insights into how other people are not running their finances very well, or even not running your finances very well. It depends. But just don't forget this fundamental sense of excitement. And certain people can actually be part of this excitement. So if you focus on the right things and don't get dragged down by the wrong things, then I think it actually can be a productive and even quite a fun day in its own. It is possible, even though you've got to run up to a full moon. So Libra, I'm not going to go on. I'm just going to say, well, be optimistic, and I think your optimism will be well rewarded, provided, of course, that you're careful and that you don't do anything that's dangerous. I suppose Venus is on the Mars-Uranus midpoint. There's always a possibility that, okay, you're slightly accident-prone, more accident-prone than usual, but it's all about a percentages thing. It's a probability thing. I'm not saying that anything bad's going to happen. Just be careful. But if you are careful, then I think your optimism will basically see you through. Scorpio. I think Scorpio, it's going to be important that you are quite self-reliant. Because Scorpio, the one person who you can trust is, of course, you yourself. If you trust other people, well, you might be disappointed. It seems that a lot of people are not on very good form. They're dragging their feet and they just seem to want to be stuck in one place. And perhaps they feel that the present and the past can go on forever. And they can somehow stop the natural processes. This is something you find strange, but it's just the way it is. And so it's possible, if you rely too much on other people, that their stubbornness and intransigence and just inability to see the world for what it really is just could hold things up. And the self-reliance is underlined by the fact that the moon is moving from Libra into Scorpio. And it doesn't really matter whether it's in Libra or Scorpio. Okay, moon is in Libra. What happens when the moon is in Libra? Libra is in the sign before Scorpio. It's often a place where one doesn't want to reveal much. It's quite a secretive sign from a Scorpio perspective. Then the moon moves into Scorpio, and that feels comfortable. But because the moon is in your own sign, but Scorpio is also quite a secretive sign, and so there are things that you want to hold back, and you're aware as you move into this full moon, this full moon at around 4 Scorpio, you're aware of the absolute difference between yourself and others. Somehow the differences seem to be more important than the similarities. And I understand that you shouldn't be focusing obsessively on differences because we're all different. But there can become a point where a difference becomes an incompatibility. And I think that might be something you just need to understand. And also, when the moon moves into Scorpio, it does make a square with Pluto. In fact, this full moon that you're coming up is square Pluto, and I think that could affect Scorpios. They're going to really realize that things are serious, and that there are things that really need to be held on to. There are some things that can't be revealed, and maybe that's a choice. That is perhaps an important decision that Scorpios are going to have to make, and it's about the concept of secrecy. You know, we all have our secrets, and there are some things we absolutely feel we must keep secret to the grave, but there are other things that perhaps we should reveal when the time is right. Because in the end, we're all going to die. And as Scorpios understand that more than anyone, because Scorpio is a sign about which is very much connected with life and death. And not everything perhaps should be taken to the grave. And perhaps now, hey, please, I'm sorry to use that rather grim imagery. I must make it clear I'm not predicting death at all. I'm just using death to just explain the importance of secrets and how we consider secrets. Because if we hold on to a secret for too long, it will never be revealed. Is that what you want? For something never to be revealed? Because really some things do need to be revealed. Perhaps from an existential point, we're here on this planet for a purpose, and some things need to be brought out into the open. And so you need to make perhaps now, Scorpio, a bit of a distinction between the two. And if something needs to be revealed, then ask yourself, how is it going to be revealed? What is the best way of revealing it? And so that's something for you. Something for you to work out. I'm certainly not going to tell you how to do it. You might not welcome my advice. Now that is a bit serious, I suppose, but I'm not saying that the world today needs to be entirely serious. There are some fun people around, fun people who are not going to infringe your boundaries, people who do respect you, but who also have a good sense of humour and who can liven things up, and they won't be judgmental. So work out who these people are. They're certainly available. You know who they are, and perhaps you should try to get in contact with them. You know, one person, the right person, can really brighten your day up. So work out who that person is and spend as much time with them as possible. Sagittarius, it's probably not an especially dramatic day. It's just a day when you feel that things are changing, and you perhaps also feel that you've said whatever you're going to say, at least in a short term. And also when interacting with other people, you just may feel that the connections just aren't there. And so, you may take the view that really there's no need to bother. And probably you're right. And I think that it's perhaps a good day for just being a little distant and letting go of your opinions, any preconceived ideas thoughts, opinions. Just let go of it all and try to just have a totally open mind. Try to live a day where you just don't believe in anything, and almost that you don't know anything, if that's possible. Obviously you know a lot and you believe a lot, but just clear it all out. Totally open mind. Because with this approach, you might get access to some interesting information. And, this perhaps links also with what I was saying, I think yesterday, do continue to tune into your feelings and into your psychic faculties, because you can really pick up a lot of really useful information. But you just have to, the filtering is always a problem. So, you don't want to jump to conclusions. And especially as the moon is moving into Scorpio, the moon moving into a water sign for you, Sagittarius, is arguably going to make you even more sensitive. And yeah, a lot of information is coming your way, but just don't let that information confirm your beliefs, because beliefs can be self-perpetuating. One can get selection bias. Isn't that what it's called? A selection bias is one selects the information, if I've got this right. A selection bias is you select the information that supports your theory, and you reject the information that doesn't support your theory. So, for example, if you want Biden to win, if you were to want Biden to win the presidential election in November, you might do a Google search for evidence that Biden is going to win in November, or reasons why Biden will win in November. And you're going to get loads of information about why Biden is going to win in November, aren't you? And that will just confirm your view that Biden is going to win. What you're not going to do is ask, why is Trump going to win in November? So do watch out for selection bias, because I think today there is some danger that Sagittarians are over selective about the information coming in, which would be a shame, because there's all sorts of information coming in, and if you can be objective and unbiased, then I think that you will be able to benefit from it all. But there's no need to talk about it. You're trying to develop a picture, and the picture is still forming, and you don't quite know what that picture is showing yet. You have some ideas about what the picture is showing, but right now it's not clear. And so I would allow the situation to develop. Also, Sagittarius, in fact, finally, just one point, Sagittarius, be careful with relationships, because I think that if you're getting close to someone, you and that other person do have different opinions. I know you're supposed not to have any opinions today. I'm suggesting you might want to get rid of all your opinions, but still, you're a Sagittarian. Every Sagittarian has opinions. But there may just be a certain temporary incompatibility over the course of the day, probably perhaps into tomorrow as well. So do consider that and tread carefully, and maybe don't say anything controversial, and if in doubt, don't. Maybe you shouldn't spend long hours with one person, because that might backfire. Capricorn, you perhaps as always are of a view that you live in a serious world, especially when the moon is moving from Libra to Scorpio. You though, I think this seriousness, I'm not just talking about money and material things. It's about the questions about why you're doing what you're doing, And I think as the moon moves into Scorpio, it's going to be about the serious questions about what is the point. It doesn't matter how much money you're making or how much money you've got. It doesn't matter how much status you've got. You still got to ask yourself, what is the point? What's it all for? And beyond the present and all the material concerns of the present, where actually are you planning on moving to, in a, not necessarily in a geographical sense, but in a spiritual and inspirational sense? And are you sufficiently geared up for making that move when it needs to be made? It may be you're not, and perhaps you need to get exposure to new things, new people, new types of information. I think new people could be important. Perhaps some of your contacts, the people you hang around with, it's all become perhaps a little bit of an echo chamber, and you maybe now need a fresh perspective, and you need to let go of some of your ideas about what makes someone useful. And what does make someone useful? Why do you need to have people in your life? Maybe your criteria for having someone in your life is in a process of change, or should be in a process of change. You know, different people have different roles, and if you only have a limited set of roles for people, you've got people can do A and B and nothing else, then you're limited. What you should perhaps be thinking of, people can do A, B, C, D, lots of different things. You have to create more roles for people, because there are so many different ways in which people can have an impact on you. And this is something that I think that you do need to take into consideration. If you are working today, as usual, it depends on the situation. You know, I always feel a bit uncomfortable asking people, you know, if you are working. I mean, I do perhaps use that phrase a little too often, but I'm just trying to show the fact that different people have different situations. And yeah, if you are working, if business is important to you, if you have a business, or if you are perhaps in general concerned about your overall status, in that situation, I do think that there can be some useful changes, or at least some useful inspirations. I think you might get some fresh ideas. The ideas could just come from nowhere. But if you're open to new ideas, and you don't tie yourself down to existing ideas, but you're open to anything, then something might come up, like almost from nowhere, not quite from nowhere. You know, you're perhaps talking to someone, you're interacting with someone, or maybe you're just on your own. In fact, you could just be on your own, reading, thinking. Suddenly there might be a sense of inspiration about really what you should be doing. So the concept of, in fact, where you should be going, yeah, it may come from nowhere, and it may come from an unexpected source. So I would have said, Capricorn, just be open to that possibility. And as far as close relationships are concerned, you can't avoid the fact that the moon is moving into Scorpio, and the moon is making a full moon in Scorpio. That may say something about another person. Another person may be approaching a watershed. Maybe someone very close to you, a partner, spouse, whatever, in their own way may be approaching a watershed. They may be making a decision. They may start to be seeing the way things are for the first time. And I think you have to understand that. So if you see someone's behavior change over the next day or two, then consider the possibility that it's down to the full moon, and that something is perhaps going on in their inner world as they're having a sense of understanding. And I think if someone is having a new understanding, that is something that you need to understand. You need to understand someone else's change of understanding or new understanding. And probably in most cases, it's probably a good idea to be quite supportive of that and not to be too judgmental. Aquarius. Aquarius, you are starting to think about the future. I mean, you've been thinking about the future for some time, and I suppose you could say that Aquarians can be a very future-orientated sign. And with the full moon, you start to see the way things are going, and you understand what is possible given the current situation. In other words, if you do nothing more, if you don't bring anything new into play, you start to see how far the whole thing can go. And this may be a bit of a concern for you. You may realize that if things carry on as they have been carrying on in the past, in the recent past, then there may be limits to what you can achieve. Oh, you will still achieve something. It's definitely there, you can achieve, but within limits. Now, you may be quite happy with those limits. Just because I'm talking about limits doesn't mean it's anything bad, and you may be quite happy with that. On the other hand, you may say, well, hold on, it's not quite going in the way you'd like it to go. When you look at the future and you look at what's possible in the future, you may say, well, actually, this is not good enough. In which case, you are now, with this full moon, you're in a position to make some changes, bring new things into play. You know, we can be wary of a full moon, but we shouldn't forget that this full moon is on the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint. Mercury-Jupiter as a pair are very optimistic, and yes, it can be forward-thinking. And so with this full moon on the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint, yes, you realize the limits of the future, but you also realize what you would need to do to expand the possibilities of the future. So what do you need to do to, bring new things into play? Now, some of those new things into play might be things that you've been involved with in the past, but you have neglected, you've ignored them, you haven't put enough resources into them, and maybe you now need to bring them back into play. Or perhaps you need to reach out to something completely different that may be beyond you to begin with, but with a bit of effort, it is going to be reachable. So I know this all sounds a bit vague, but I'm just asking you, Aquarius, to just think about the future and think about how you can change the future, because I think this full moon can be very useful. And don't underestimate the ability of other people to make a bright future come true for you. And I'm not necessarily talking about, people very close to you, just people in general. Because there are people out there who have some wonderful ideas and who can listen to you, listen to your concerns, and who can give you some really good feedback. So I know that actually can be quite difficult for Aquarians, because Aquarius is a very independent-minded sign, but you just shouldn't neglect what other people can offer, because the right person is really going to listen to your concerns, and I think that they'll have some ideas, and that can help move you on. And it's really, Aquarius, about making the most of your resources. You know, you need to bring, as I was kind of suggesting, you've got to just bring more resources into play. And the more resources you bring into play, the brighter the future looks. Pisces. So Pisces is a water sign, and the moon is on the verge of moving into Scorpio. And, you know, I know that Scorpio the moon in Scorpio has a somewhat difficult reputation. Moon in Scorpio is fallen, but the moon is but Scorpio is a water sign, and Pisces is a water sign. And so when the moon goes into Scorpio, you have a greater sense of emotional affinity with everything going on around you, and you're more sensitive. And I think it's possible that you start getting access to high level stuff on an emotional level. You perhaps just pick up on things that other people miss. Of course, you have to understand your limits. And I think I suggested this yesterday, that you have to be careful that you don't overwhelm yourself with information. The information just could, in certain situations, bring you to a standstill. And so, what you need to do, I think, Pisces, is not get caught on the details of each individual fact, of each individual intuition, feeling. You know, yes, every fact, intuition, feeling is highly charged, is highly suggestive, and it's easy to overreact. But it's a good idea right now not to overreact, to just let things pass. Isn't it like with electricity? I don't know about electricity, but if electricity runs through you, isn't it like if your car gets hit by an electricity pole, you shouldn't get out of your car because somehow the rubber on the tires will protect you. I don't really know much about physics, but the moment you get out of your car, that's when the trouble starts. But so it's like the electricity just has to run through you. Don't take my advice in a physical sense. Don't play around with electrics, but you just have to let the electricity run through you and not resist it. Because when you resist it, when you try to process it, that's when the problems start. Let the facts, the intuitions, the feelings just run through you. Don't stop it. Don't ask questions. Just to be an observer. That's how to run it. That's how to work it. And just let that happen for a day or two, and then slowly the impressions will start to form. And as the impressions form, you'll start to understand where it's all going, and then you can perhaps take advantage of the full moon. You know, this full moon is not all bad. This full moon, as I've been telling other signs, this full moon is on the Mercury-Jupiter the midpoint, and so this full moon can finally show you something which you've never seen before. And once you see it, you'll have this new understanding, and it will all become very clear, and that will be the pathway to successful action. Okay, that's it for the 12 signs, and at least, you know, I'm looking at today from a perspective of astrology. I now want to look at today from a perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, you know, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 47, which is oppression. Don't worry about it. It's not as bad as it looks. But we're just feeling that things are a little bit overwhelming. Maybe it's because it's a run up to the full moon. Maybe it's the beginning of a week. It's just overwhelming. And we're just wondering, how are we going to be able to keep going? We're carrying something very heavy, and we just have to keep going. And is there any end to it? And in the first instance, we get a moving line. This bottom line here, it moves. And as a result of this, our first reaction to the situation might be really negative. We might just think that we are just completely stuck, that there is nothing we can do, and we just get stuck in this way of looking at the world, which is pretty gloomy. And that's something short term, though. We have two lines moving in this hexagram, not just the one. And the fifth line moves as well. Now, in the I Ching, the fifth line tends to be fortunate. And this is starting to give a more constructive message here. The first point is that we're not doing anything wrong. If things are not working, it's not our fault. It's just something temporary. And we need to have faith. In fact, the I Ching even suggests that we turn to God, whatever that means to you. And we just remain solid in terms of what we're doing. Yes, there is a lot to carry, but we need to have faith in ourselves. And if we're not getting any support or recognition, we shouldn't be too upset about it. Okay, we can be concerned about it, but things are starting to move, and it does seem that in the end we will be able to perhaps get recognized, but also it may be there's a possibility that we may realize that part of the reason we are feeling so negative and that things aren't, we've got these responsibilities and we're not getting any help, it may just be down to someone else. If this relates, for example, to a job, it might be your employer. It might be someone not taking you, not respecting you. If you want to look at it from a really high level, it just may be about the government not taking you seriously. The I Ching was, of course, was originally written for sort of people, minor nobility, warlords, and so the advice might be to say, well, the emperor or whoever's above you is not taking you seriously, and you need to perhaps escape from whatever this hierarchy is that is oppressing you. And that hierarchy could be government, it could be your friends, it could be your family, it could be your job. Something somewhere is just holding you up, and it's not actually your fault. And then, because we've got two lines moving, 47, oppression, the hexagram shifts, and we move to a new hexagram, and we move to hexagram 54, which is the marrying maiden. And the symbol, of course, of a marrying maiden is a woman who wants to get married. But she mustn't be too impulsive, and she must understand her station, and she must take things slowly. And in the same way, there's something we're trying to sort out. We understand what needs to be done. Maybe it's a full moon energy. It's like giving us knowledge. it's showing us the way, but we can't be in a hurry about it. It's about slowly advancing and returning things to normality. Yes, the previous hexagram oppression does indicate that there is a heavy load. We do, but we are starting to see an improvement. But just we mustn't be in a hurry. We must slowly move towards our goal, and then we can see a resolution to the issue. I mean, I know it's an issue we want sorted out quickly, but we just mustn't be in too much of a hurry. Yes, there is a full moon today, and this full moon might be causing some of these issues, and I understand that the I Ching and astrology are independent of one another. But still, there may be a reflection of the two, and yes, there is a full moon. And now I want to turn back to the astrology and look at this full moon, and not perhaps this full moon in particular, but rather what it means to have a full moon in one's horoscope. And so I really want to look at a number of charts really, very quickly. Now, in terms of how you see a full moon, there was an astrologer, Dane Raja, who wrote a book called The Lunation Cycle, and where he went through all the phases of the moon. I don't think I have that book anymore, but he went through all the phases of the moon, and certainly the full moon was one particular phase. It's a very, very long time since I've read the book, but you can almost relate the lunar phases to karma. It's like you might see, if you see, for example, having thousands of hundreds, I don't know, however many incarnations you have, we're on a spiral, and so on each level of the spiral we have to go through the lunation cycle. We might, a new moon person is going to see the world differently from a full moon person. So if you're a new moon person, you might come into life being, this is all new, this is all wonderful. You do get these people, but they can be at all levels. Just because you're a new moon person doesn't mean to say you're a new soul. I hate that concept, new soul. It doesn't mean you're a new soul. It means that you're new to this particular level. But it just kind of makes it all sound like a video game, and I'm sure it's not a video game. But so the new moon person, it just has a sense of excitement because it's all new. Whereas a full moon person is different. It's a time where you actually have moved on and you can actually see things for the way they are, and we're now seeing a fundamental dynamic tension here. And the full moon, that dynamic tension is going to be between the sun and the moon. And people who are born at the time of a full moon can sort of alternate between the sun and the moon. For example, if you've got sun in Cancer, moon in Capricorn, someone who is perhaps incredibly warm and nurturing most of the time, but suddenly their vital interests become under threat and they switch straight to the moon in Capricorn. That can be, for example, one way it works. Additionally, to say, full moons normally go across the polarities, the qualities, Aries, Libra, Taurus, Scorpio. And it's certainly if you use a whole sign house system, but if you're using a Placidus house system, particularly you can have a dissociate full moon, a full moon that is very close but is not in natural signs. So, for example, you could have the moon at 1 degree Cancer and the sun at 29 degrees Sagittarius. That is a full moon, yet it's a Cancer Sagittarius full moon. So we do have to be a little bit aware of that. Looking at some people who have the full moon, and a thing about the full moon is sometimes the full moon is going to, usually I think the full moon, we're going to see the sun and the moon as being really opposed to each other. You really see that, for example, sun in Cancer, moon in Capricorn, perhaps. although I suppose you can see that both Cancer and Capricorn have a certain defensiveness to them. Certainly Moon in Capricorn does. So there is a certain similarity, but they're not quite the same, because Cancer is a water sign and the moon is going to, and Capricorn is, of course, an earth sign. Now, someone I talk about a great deal is, of course, Donald Trump. And we should not forget that Donald Trump is a full moon person. And I'm absolutely not going to look at his chart in any detail. But just a reminder about the full moon, that Donald Trump has the moon in Sagittarius and the sun in Gemini. The full moon can certainly create a lot of dynamism. I mean, whatever you think about him, he's very dynamic. And I think that when looking at Donald Trump, it's often confusing. Are we looking at a Gemini or are we looking at a Sagittarius? It's difficult, isn't it? Gemini, with Sun in Gemini, he's certainly an air sign. He's moving from one thing to another. He's quite flexible. He's ideologically flexible. That's Sun in Gemini. Complete ideological flexibility. You know, I know he's a Republican, but fundamentally, he's really a liberal New Yorker, isn't he? Traditionally, I don't think he was. This is where he was supposed to be. I don't think he could care less about abortion. I don't think he cares less about gun rights. That's just not very important to him fundamentally. But he's flexible, and perhaps he needs to understand. He does what he has to do to get elected and to get support. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, by the way. He's a politician. All politicians are like that. Him in particular. But he has a moon in Sagittarius, so there's a tension there between Trump's moon in Sagittarius and his sun in Gemini. So the sun conjunct North Node in Gemini is perhaps where he should be going. The moon conjunct the South Node in Sagittarius is perhaps where he should not be going, but where it's most easy for him to be. And so with the Sun conjunct North Node in Gemini in the 10th house, it's his destiny in some ways to be a leader, to be president. Sorry if you don't like him, but that is his destiny. But what is tripping up his destiny? The moon in Sagittarius, he is clearly, his impulsiveness and tactlessness and at times his coarseness. I think some of his grossness may be to do with his moon in Sagittarius, moon conjunct South Node. And again, when I say grossness, I'm not putting any evaluation. I'm not evaluating him. I'm not casting an opinion on him. But all of this, there's something very somewhat gross and tawdry about all this stuff with Stormy Daniels in July 2006, and he's going through it. That's perhaps moon in Sagittarius. It just can't help himself. Though, of course, it's also connected with, I know he's got a Venus-Saturn conjunction in Cancer, which can actually be quite promiscuous. But so Donald Trump is a moon opposition Sun person. I think with Donald Trump, the Sun in Gemini, moon in Capricorn, in a weird kind of way, they're sort of complementing each other, even though they're in opposition. They're very dynamic. And this is how he's able to express himself. I mean, yeah, sure, he's not very good at the fact, perhaps Sun in Gemini should be better in terms of the facts, but the moon in Sagittarius just says what's on his mind, and and I think he communicates through his moon, not his Mercury. His Mercury is in Sagittarius. It's the square Neptune. It's just that Mercury is not. That's not a great intellect. He certainly wasn't a great scholar, was he? But it's the communication, moon in Sagittarius, that does allow him to communicate. And of course, moon in Gemini, moon in Moon in Sagittarius likes to say what he says, says what he feels, and Sun in Gemini just says, well, it's only words. That's a, why are you offended? It's just words. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I suppose you could say that. That seems to be so far how it seems to have worked. So that's the full moon with Donald Trump. Now, two women in American politics who I think a lot of people watching this can't stand are Kamala Harris and AOC. So there is Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has an exact full moon. Moon in Aries, opposition Sun in Libra. And when you're dealing with a female chart, I take the view that the moon is more important than the sun. The moon is a female planet. And so, as far as I'm concerned, as a woman grows older, particularly past her late 20s, she becomes more like her sun, less like her, more like her moon. She grows into her moon and grows out of her sun. And I think in male charts, it's the opposite. I think boys, men before their early 20s are more about their moon and less about this, and then they grow into their sun. So I think it's the opposite, at least that's my view. And so, but what Kamala Harris should be doing is getting into her sun, being assertive. By the way, I'm not going to pass any judgment on Kamala Harris. I'm not going to go into a horoscope in detail. I've looked at a horoscope before. I think she has a much stronger chart than some people realize, and I think one should be very wary about writing Kamala Harris off. I know that's probably not what you want to hear, but I can look at her chart again on another occasion. But right now, I just want to look at her full moon. So moon in Aries, that's where she should be going. Moon in Aries, being assertive, perhaps about leadership and so forth. But it's the sun in Libra that is tripping her up. And I'm guessing that part of her problem as a politician is that she doesn't know whether she's a leader or whether she is a follower, someone who has to take into account different interest groups. Clearly, her early political career was very much associated with certain people, and she was able to benefit from that. That's Sun in Libra. Perhaps her as a younger woman benefiting from people, trying to always compromise. And the thing is, if you try to always compromise, it can be a problem, because you're trying to compromise, but at the same time, that moon in Aries is trying to assert itself. But the moon in Aries can't assert itself because the sun in Libra is just messing her up. And so as a vice president, it's disastrous, because she's sun in Libra is just going to, she realizes she's vice president. She's got to deal with all these people. And at the same time, she's trying to assert herself. Apparently, she's a really horrible person to work for. I think her staff just don't last long. And that might be the instability of her full moon. Moon in Aries trying to assert itself, but asserting itself in the wrong way. And sun in Libra, then she's trying to keep some other interest happy, and it just doesn't really work out. And it may actually be that if she were to become president, I'm afraid, there's a very good chance that she does become president. If she were to become president, maybe things would completely change. And I've looked at her Vedic chart. Things are getting better and better for her, by the way. They are so improving right now for her. It's not getting any worse. And if she were to become president, maybe that moon in Libra would start to come into its own, and she could be her own person. I know I'm going to get lots of criticism, negative comments about that, but I'm not a fan of Kamala Harris, but I just do feel that her chart is stronger than one realizes, especially from a Vedic perspective. So that might be for her how the full moon is working. Another American politician who has moon in Aries and sun in Libra is AOC. There's her sun in Libra, moon in Aries. Again, her chart is not. Her particular Vedic chart. Her chart is stronger than it looks. Again, she's another person one shouldn't write off. Again, I'm not a fan of AOC, but don't write her off. And she's got the moon in Aries and the sun in Libra. Now, you'll notice that this full moon is not exact at all. It's got an orb of 17 degrees. And if you're someone who is used to sort of Placidus house cusps, you may take the view, well, she doesn't have a full moon at all. Certainly not from an aspectual point of view. But if you're using whole sign houses, then you'd say, well, she's got the sun in Aries, and it's in the opposite sign as the sun. Sorry, she's got the moon in Aries, which is opposite the sun in Libra, and the precise angles don't really matter. And therefore we have a similar theme as with Kamala Harris, but nothing like as strong. Her sun in what I think could mess AOC's career up is that sun in Libra. That sun in Libra just being too keen to keep in with various interest groups. And the sun is her as a young woman. I know she's still pretty young, but she's getting older. She needs to grow out of that sun in Libra fast and start to move into that moon. And so, but still, being a full moon person, she may alternate between moon in Aries, sun in Libra, following interest groups, trying to be all things to all people, and then suddenly moon in Aries, coming up, saying things, and the things she says, moon in Aries, the things she tweets, she makes videos about, can cause a lot of offence very quickly. So if moon in Aries acts in the wrong way, well, she could blow up her political career. I don't think she will, but I think that is certainly a possibility. And also notice that moon in Aries opposition Mercury in Libra. That is a problem. The things she says could really trip her up. Someone else, let's see who else we've got who's got a full moon. Well, we have to talk about Princess Catherine, who has got sun in moon. She was born under a full moon. So she's got moon in Cancer, sun in Capricorn. I don't really want to say much about this, but the way I see her chart very simply is that moon in Cancer in the 12th, conjunct the North Node, that is where she's supposed to be going to, and sun in Capricorn, conjunct the South Node. Clearly, that's the past. She comes perhaps from her upbringing. It's perhaps a very ambitious upbringing. Perhaps she's got an aspirational family. They want her to, make the best for herself and perhaps push her in a particular way. And that sun in Capricorn it's just so easy for her to move into sun in Capricorn. But, sun in Capricorn is the past. That sun in Capricorn is going to be strongest when she was, when she was a girl, before she hit her early 20s. But she should have been starting to move into that moon in Cancer. Moon in Cancer conjunct the North Node. And I think that is part of the problem. And you will see that she's got Saturn on the Sun-Moon midpoint, and I think with that moon in Cancer, by the way, I must emphasize that the sign Cancer has nothing to do with the disease Cancer. I must emphasize that. But with her full moon, it's that struggle to move in a direction of that moon conjunct North Node in Cancer. And I think that she's basically, as far as I can see, she's failed. She's got stuck on that Sun conjunct South Node in Capricorn, square Saturn. So yeah, in her case, I think that full moon is really difficult. And because of the circumstances she's found herself in, maybe she hasn't handled that full moon very well. It would have been very difficult for her to be aware of it. And I think, the public life and all the duties and obligations of royalty doesn't suit her. And notice how the Sun conjunct South Node in Cancer is in the 6th house. Maybe, in the end, it's made her sick at some symbolic level. Her son, Prince George, was born under a full moon. There it is. There's his full moon. Sun at 29:59 Cancer. We see this a lot in royal charts. People being born very, very close to the cusp. His father was born almost to Gemini, but just into Cancer. So Sun in Cancer, Sun 29:59 Cancer, Moon 28:17 Cancer. I am very concerned about that full moon, and I think that this is one of the reasons why I don't think that Prince George is suitable to be King of England, or King of Britain, whatever. There's, as I've said before, he has no planets in water. He has his only planet, he has no planets in air. He's got tons of planets in water. He's got no planets in air. He's got only one planet in fire, and he's got this full moon. And I don't think we've seen that moon in Cancer yet. The public has not seen that moon in Capricorn. I don't think we've seen that moon in Capricorn. I think that is a really difficult moon in Capricorn. And I don't know, I hate to say this, but I think there's a certain amount of unpleasantness about it. I don't know. I just think that it's possible. Unpleasantness as in self-interest, maybe. Remember what I was saying about Moon in Capricorn, opposition Sun in Cancer? I mean, that is a real possibility. Perhaps we haven't seen it yet. But he can perhaps swing between Sun and Cancer, Moon in Capricorn. Sun in Cancer is being that's nurturing and warm and very emotional. He's a super Cancer, got 4 planets in Cancer, but then his opposition Moon in Capricorn. There is just a bit of a difficulty there. And I believe that we're going to see later this year, I think we've got a full moon. Talking about full moons, we have got a full moon on July the 21st, which is the day before his birthday. It's his solar return, pretty much, at 29:9 Capricorn. So we see this full moon getting repeated this year, and that full moon really does come into sharp focus there again. And look at his Saturn, by the way. We've got a full moon today, haven't we? Full moon is at 4 something Scorpio, right on his Saturn. And I do think that George's full moon is just way too sensitive. It's too close. It's a close full moon, makes him really sensitive. He's already got tons of planets in water. And, when I say he could be unpleasant, I mean, I think there is a possible unpleasantness there with that moon in Capricorn. There is a self-interest to that moon in Capricorn. I don't know how it's going to manifest, but it is there. And I think overall that full moon for him, I do not think that is a fortunate full moon. And I think that, it is a further reason why he should he should never be king. He should accept that as soon as possible. And I'm wondering, is he starting to accept it now? That is possible. And it is going to be a difficult year for him, I believe. And as I said, this full moon is on his Saturn. The full moon at the end of July is a repeat of his own full moon. So that is Prince George's chart. And it's, of course, interesting that his mother had a full moon, was born at a full moon as well, though the opposite full moon, Sun in Capricorn, Moon in Cancer. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, looking at other people with the full moon, I suppose I should briefly point out, as I've got his picture up there, that Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives, was born at the time of the full moon. We don't know precisely when this full moon is because we don't know his time of birth. But at noon in Chevreport, Louisiana, the sun was at 9 Aquarius, the moon was at 13 Leo, and so that the moon is conjunct the South Node. One wonders why he decided to support this foreign aid bill in the end and allow it to come to a vote. Apparently, one way or another, the vote would have gone through, would have happened at some level, but maybe that moon conjunct South Node in Leo is, it's in contrast with his sun in the Sun North Node in Aquarius. And North Node is about being independent, being independent-minded, not perhaps being completely tied to interest groups or political pressure. That's Sun in Aquarius. Moon in Leo, South Node, his weak point may be a vulnerability to flattery and his own position and office. And perhaps this is what's happened. As soon as he became Speaker of the House of Representatives, that moon in Leo started to kick in. And who knows what kind of pressure was put on him when he decided to allow this foreign aid bill to come to the vote. But maybe it has something to do with his moon conjunct South Node. And he flipped from being the independent-minded sun in Aquarius to being moon in Leo, vulnerable to flattery and the pursuit of office. Moon in Leo likes the pursuit of office, continuation of office. I don't know, who knows what was told to him, but I suspect it has something to do with his moon in Leo conjunct the South Node. But I don't have a time of birth, so it's difficult to be too precise there. Then there is Alec Baldwin. If you've been watching my videos, you perhaps have noticed that I don't really spend too much time talking about actors because I don't really find them very interesting by and large. But Alec Baldwin has a moon in Libra conjunct the sun in Aries. Maybe you know more about Alec Baldwin than me. But the sun in Aries, he's trying hard to be assertive, but that moon in Libra, perhaps trying at the same time trying to make people happy. But moon in Aries, sun in Aries, moon in Libra can be about trying to make people happy, but in the process making everyone unhappy. Perhaps that's one way it can work. But he certainly has this full moon, and I just wanted to just quickly look at what was happening to his chart while I'm here. I might as well. When we had that shooting, which was on October the 1st, 2021, when he used his gun and he didn't know there was a live round in it, and he shot someone on set, and this is the time for the shooting. And on the outer wheel, just interesting that the sun was exactly conjunct his Jupiter when it happened. I just noticed that. And as far as his full moon is concerned, it did actually happen quite close to a full moon. The shooting did happen just after a full moon, about 13 degrees after a full moon. So that full moon was around 27, would have been at around 27.5 Libra. So it was just after a full moon. And so maybe if you've got a full moon in your chart, you're going to be perhaps more sensitive to full moons in general. So that is certainly a possibility. And certainly it did. So just after a full moon is when this shooting happened with the sun conjunct his Jupiter. I don't have his time of birth, by the way, so I'm not. That Jupiter is not in his 8th house, but that's Alec Baldwin's horoscope. Then I want to look at an event. King Charles, by the way, he got crowned on a full moon. Full moons tend to be unfortunate. Ideally, you should not have full moons when you're getting crowned, because the full moon suggests it's the end of something, doesn't it? But something is past its peak. And so when Charles got crowned, May the 6th, 2023, there was the sun pretty much a year ago. It was almost exactly a year ago, well, just under. The sun was at 15 Taurus, the moon was at 24 Scorpio. And so that's really as an indication that something was coming to an end. And that really shows to me that an astrologer had nothing to do with the selection of that date. I mean, from an astrological point of view, as far as I'm concerned, that is a really bad chart to get crowned. Getting crowned with moon in Scorpio, in terms of traditional planets, I think it's void of course. So it's made its last major aspect to a traditional planet before leaving the sign. Okay, it goes to a trine of Neptune, but that doesn't really count. So yeah, that's real evidence that an astrologer wasn't involved in choosing the coronation chart. One final chart I want to look at. I don't know if you remember, but one of these people who was in line for the British throne is this woman called what's her name? Gabriella Windsor, and she, I think she's the daughter of is it right? The Duke of Kent. I get these people mixed up, but so she got married. We do have a marriage chart for her, and she got married on a full moon. So let me just show you the chart. So she got married May the 18th, 2019, and you can see that the moon is at when she got married. She married. Who did she marry? She married someone called Thomas Kingston. So she got married with moon in Scorpio applying to an opposition of the sun. Like the coronation, you should avoid these kind of getting married on a full moon, particularly moon in Scorpio, and sun on Algol. I don't know how close it is to Algol. I think it was fairly close to Algol. Let me just see if it fixed stars. It's just Algol. Sun conjunct Algol with an orb of 0 degrees and 49 minutes. So yes, she got married with the sun conjunct Algol, and the moon was applying to the sun. That is not good. Now, so what happened? What happened was that in February, the man she married, as far as I can see, he killed himself. They say I think the official report says traumatic head wound, gun found found close by. So I'm assuming that means he shot himself. And here is the here is the man she married, Thomas Kingston. You will see that he was born relatively soon after a full moon. There's a sun in Cancer and there's a moon in Capricorn. So from a whole sign perspective, you could certainly say that looks like a full moon to me. So, okay, the orb is very large, 23 degrees, but there's still a full moon feel to this chart. And so when we're talking about full moons, if the sun and the moon are in opposite signs, I think any chart does have a full moon feel. So that's his chart. I don't really want to talk about the details of his chart. But what I do want to talk about is the time when I believe the emergency services were called. And so there's Saturn on the descendant. But again, he shot himself on February the 25th. I think that's what happened, on February the 25th, 2024. I suppose it could have been an accident, but I don't know. But again, moon in Virgo, sun in Pisces. So he was born on a wide full moon, very wide full moon, and he died on a very wide full moon. And so this perhaps suggests if you've got a full moon in your chart, like with Alec Baldwin, born at a full moon with a full moon on his chart, he's going to be sensitive to, he's going to be sensitive to full moon kind of. The full moon is going to be quite a time which is going to be he's going to be sensitive to that. But certainly with this chart, he got what's her name, Gabriella Windsor, got married on a full moon to a man who had a wide full moon, to a man who shot himself on a wide full moon. So there is that repeated theme there. Okay, those are some thoughts on full moons. Obviously, a massive bias here. I'm just choosing the charts and events that I found interesting. So that doesn't necessarily mean that this is an objective view about what full moons are, but I'm just trying to give you some food for thought about how we might try to understand full moons. So I hope you found that of some use. If you did find that interesting, I'd be grateful if you were to indicate that you liked this video. If you like this video and you're not subscribed, I would, of course, be very grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.